when you make money, the profile of somebody that has money, they're not easy people, or else they wouldn't be successful. They're drivers, right? They're demanding. They tend to typically get what they want. So they could sit there and say, if I just cut you $1 million check and you got up there and, for example, let's use the instance of what happened, right? Where Tucker had Nick on, right? Tucker had Nick on and they did a podcast together and he got a lot of heat for it. And right afterwards, I think you said, we will always stand with Tucker and you said something very positive, complimentary towards Tucker. And I think even Tucker spoke at Heritage 2.5 years ago at one of your events. So he's complimentary of you guys as well. But when that came out and then some of the people walked, there was a article that came out, maybe even you spoke about it, about going to your staff and apologizing. What did you apologize for?
I apologized for two things, mixing up personal friendship with institutional friendship. And secondly, especially for Jewish friends, but for anyone, a couple of phrases in there that I regretted. And I can tell you my closest Jewish friend called me the next morning and he said, Kevin, I know you're not an anti-Semite. You've expanded the work of anti-Semitism at Heritage. And he said, you're a Roman Catholic. I know your faith well enough to know you couldn't be. He said, but this is something that you need to address head on. And so it's sort of like the conversation with my retired OBGYN friend and donor, that this Jewish friend, up until this very moment as we sit here, has been a great guide in setting up conversations for me and for us at Heritage to have. The reason those have gone well, in spite of not just the news cycle, but what seems to be an agenda that goes well beyond the video controversy, is because people know the record at Heritage. I think it's safe to say, if you think about my colleagues who work on the scourge of anti-Semitism, there's no organization, at least of our size and scope, that isn't a single issue organization that's done more to expand work against anti-Semitism. And so that's really carried the day. And as we sit here with this recent flap and news cycle having concluded, people realize, oh, I know Heritage. I'd say people know me and the work I've done, especially as a Catholic leader against anti-Semitism. But the most important thing is I know their aspirational policy vision for the future, and we want to be part of that. Let's get to work. Because remember, we might just have 6 or 8 or 9 more months to get good policy.
But what were the two things you apologized for? You said two things you said you apologized for.
I thought that the script of the video was in a couple of cases was ineloquent. And I talked about that then, so I don't have to repeat them. But the point is, I thought from my Jewish friend's point of view, that while he could excuse it, that maybe other people who didn't know me.
I get that, but I'm trying to, your Heritage Foundation, you guys, your main cornerstone is freedom of speech, right? So yeah. I watched the video multiple times, it sounded like a very reasonable video. I'm a Syrian Armenian. I don't have any problems with them, with anyone who's Jewish whatsoever. We've had Bibi on, but we've had Nick Fuentes on. We're the only podcast in the world that within 30 days had Bibi and Nick Fuentes on. No one's ever done that before, not mainstream or podcasting. We'll talk to anybody and have a great conversation with them. But I want to go back to it. Is it when you said you can be someone who supports the Jewish someone who can criticize the Jewish community without being an anti-Semite? I think you said something like that, right? Do you still stand by that position?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not what I apologize for.
Okay, so wasn't that what you?
No, it was mixing personal friendship with institutional friendship, and it sort of goes back to one of your earlier questions about being a nonprofit leader. Heritage is not my business. Heritage is a nonprofit organization. I get the privilege to lead.
Jim Collins
said
earlier, right?
And so that's the first thing, and then the second thing is some really genuinely close friends of mine who are Jewish said, Kevin, there are a couple phrases in there that we forgive you for, but while we support your stance on free speech and not canceling people, it's also a separate matter to make sure that one of the ways that we can sustain free speech and speaking freely is to make sure that our words are carefully chosen. That was the thing that I wanted to address.
So I live in Florida. We came here because of DeSantis. We like DeSantis. I think he's the #1 governor in America.
He's done a remarkable job.
I think he's done a phenomenal job, and I'm a big fan, and I recruit for him all day long to get people to come here. We moved a lot of people to Florida because I can easily promote him, unlike the previous governor when I lived in California, Newsom. I lived in Texas as well, and I could promote for him as well. He was an easy governor to promote for. Even Perry was an easy governor to promote for. But, sometimes when, in our company, okay, we have people here that work that want to be part of Valuetainment. They're hardcore Christians, and hardcore. We got to protect, Zionists, and we got to, you can't. And then we have guys that are, on the other side where they're like, wait a minute, why can't you criticize them? Why are they coming out with certain legislation where you can be critical of some of the things they're doing with, to criticize AIPAC or to criticize this? Why can't you do that? And I'm right here is where I'm at, right? And I watch both. That's what I like. I like to see both sides. Where do you stand with it? What's your position with that?
It's really important, this is Heritage's position, that there is a difference between political Zionism, which is the right of the Israeli state to exist, which we support 100%, probably rather famously. The second, and divorce that from theological Zionism. And those of us who are Christians, depending upon what our particular Christian faith is, have differences of opinion on that. Because they're theological, and because Heritage is a non-sectarian organization, we honor all of those. And we have some people who work on very pro-Israel policy who are Christian Zionists.
Within the organization.
Within Heritage. We have others who are not Christian Zionists. They agree 100%. We at Heritage agree 100% on political Zionism, but we have to, as a non-sectarian organization, allow this theological disagreement, which really, inside the workings of Heritage, don't have a place because we're not a religious organization. And I think one of the fruits that's come out of the last few months is Heritage playing a role in reminding people of that delineation. And it's helped some of the fracturing of the conservative movement because people, whether through ignorance, just not having read about this or maybe having forgotten, they have conflated political Zionism and theological Zionism. They're two different things. And I think that may be a helpful way for people like you and me who are in the middle of those questions, although 100% supportive of Israel's right to exist, that we remind people of that.
Got it. So when you're getting calls, and let's just say you have a big donor that's calling you and they're saying, hey, we don't like what you said. Maybe it could have been different on how you approach this situation on Israel. Do you guys put events together and allow folks from opposing sides to debate and have conversation where the donors can see it?
Yes, we do. In fact, we pride ourselves.
Can you give me an example of that?
Sure. Let me take back up one step real briefly, if I may, because this is really important context, although it's going to sound like nerdy think tank talk. Heritage is famous for something called its one voice policy. Unlike other policy organizations in DC, where different scholars at the same organization can have different voices, different positions on issues, Heritage, if we speak on something, it's as an institution, a single voice, one voice. Why? Because we're advocating for policy change. You can't write a white paper.
Meaning you guys at the top have to be aligned 100%.
We have to have one position, the same position on a policy issue. So, for example,
in front of the donors, you guys have to be aligned. Behind closed doors, we can debate and discourse, but
total sausage making, there has to be, right?
I agree fully. Okay, I got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but at the end of the day, once we get out of that door, in front of everybody, we're on the same page, united.
That's right.
Okay.
So that's important context for the story I'm going to tell. So we have this one voice policy. It had become sort of moribund when I and my leadership arrived in late 2021, for whatever reason, I don't know. But we were charged by the board, revitalize the one voice policy. And the way, interestingly, although it doesn't quite meet the eye initially, the way you do that is to actually increase the debate internally. Our rules are, it's got to be collegial, it's got to be professional, can't be personal. And the way you amplify that is to have competing voices come in and do public events. We're not saying that having someone who disagrees with us on tax policy or education policy is somehow going to now change our own policy, but we're saying we're confident enough in our own research, our own position, that of course we want to have public debates. The big issue example I want to offer is our changing policy on China. Heritage led the way on most Americans' belief, certainly mine, that America was going to prevail on China because our free market and American values were going to turn China into us. And when I got to Heritage, by the time I got to Heritage, I was convinced by none other than Donald Trump that that was wrong, that China had been taking advantage of us, that American policy had been too weak.
So you guys got started in '73.
Yep.
This is Nixon. Triangular diplomacy. We go to strengthen China. We open up the market. They go from number 10 to number 2 in GDP. Russia drops. to weaken USSR Soviet. So at that time, we can convince China to think like us. That was the mindset of Heritage?
The prevailing mindset, not just of Heritage, but of the conservative movement under George W. Bush's presidency.
Baptize them into our way of thinking.
Exactly. And the thing is, that was well-intentioned. And so I get to Heritage, and I had the same misguided thought, right? So this is not Kevin saying, man, I've been right for 25 years, listen to me. I get to Heritage and I say, guys, we have to change our policy. And so what do? We start having public debates, conversations on our stage at Heritage, introducing, including for our own colleagues, that, maybe we were wrong, well-intentioned. And then we publish this big paper in 2023. And everything for us starts with the research in order for us to talk about it, right? A new Cold War with China in 2023. The Washington establishment went nuts. Why? Because that's not the prevailing Republican establishment thought. We're going to turn China into the United States. This story leads to one of my favorite stories in my tenure at Heritage. Our aforementioned longtime president, Ed Fulner, calls me and he says, Kevin, we were wrong on China, and I want to come to an all-staff meeting and I want to explain why. I said, Ed, you don't have to do that. There's risk to you. People will think that, it's your fault. They said, you've got nothing to be blamed on. I had the same idea. He came to a staff meeting and he said, I want to tell all of you that the policy we're now embarking on, which is a hawkish position on China, where now the conservative movement is, certainly the Trump administration is, we have to be with. And he said, if we're going to have the humility to persuade people that we were wrong and now we're right, it starts with conversations internally. It starts with conversations on this stage, because sometimes policymakers need to develop that humility. I am extremely proud, ironically, of that humble moment by Dr. Fulner, by Heritage as an institution, because what we said was our research was good, we were well-intentioned in the policy prescriptions that we offered, but that was a generation ago, and circumstances have clearly changed. And if we don't read reality truthfully and see what China has been doing, who in Washington will? And so that really is how we operate, which is why, to connect to the recent story that you were asking about, we'd never doubted that we were going to flourish through that kind of news cycle, because every 3 or 4 or 5 years, there's some controversy that Heritage starts because we are willing to take a look at the facts and tell the story as we think it is.
When we set out to create a shoe that blends comfort, function, and luxury, we had the choice to make it fast. We had the choice to make it cheap. We chose neither. Instead, we chose Tuscany, Italy. We chose true Italian craftsmanship, each pair touched by 50 skilled hands. We chose patience, spending 2 years perfecting every detail, and we chose the finest quality at every step. Introducing the Future Looks Bright collection. Not rushed, not disposable, not ordinary. Rather, intentional, luxurious, timeless. If you enjoyed this video, you want to watch more videos like this, click here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click here.